Welcome to my new podcast. This is a little bit of an experiment, and I'm looking forward to seeing how everybody likes it. My podcast for today is how to create a killer radiology personal statement, and I think you'll find it very helpful for those of you that are applying for a radiology profession. So, just to begin, if you have to pick one part of the application that is probably the least important for the radiology profession, it's most likely going to be the personal statement. That being said, regardless of whatever I say, you guys still are going to want to create the best possible personal statement that you can. So I am going to give you those tools that you need to create that great personal statement. So let's begin. So the first paragraph, I like to call this the hook. You need to find something that's really going to reel that program director in. I could tell you that based upon my own experience, after reading 10 to 12 different applications in any given day, it's really the first paragraph that will either bore the reader or will make the reader want to read on to find out what's next in the personal statement. So how do you create that great hook? There are several techniques that are quite effective for creating the hook. The first one is the use of irony. Notice at the beginning of the podcast and also in the post that I've created, at the very beginning I state that personal statements are the least efficient way of going about getting that application accepted to the place that you want. However, you notice my title says how to create a killer personal statement. So I create a little bit of dissonance, and that makes the reader want to figure out, hey, what's going on here? That's an example of irony, and that's a great technique to use to reel that program director in to get that application and personal statement looked at. So what other techniques can you use? One thing that I certainly like is a great quotation. For example, most quotations from Albert Einstein tend to be interesting. They have double meanings. They make me want to read on and figure out why you use that quotation. Lastly, another technique that I like is a great descriptive experience that you've had that tells you about why you were interested in radiology or why you're going into the field of radiology. Use great adverbs and adjectives and make it really, really exciting. Sometimes that reels the reader in, especially me, the program director. I would avoid the use of some of the overused examples. I have one post that I've created called Personal Statement Mythbusters. I recommend you go to that post to take a look at that, and that will enable you to make sure not to use some of those overly used examples. All right, let's go to the second paragraph. Second paragraph is a great place to explain any sort of problems or issues that you've had during your residency. You want to get to that as soon as possible. Get that out of the way. It may be that you had a bad experience with a quotation in your dean's letter. You need to explain that. It's really, really important to do so. It creates questions in the program director's mind as to whether or not your application is going to be of a quality of an applicant that should be accepted. Other issues are serious issues, such as perhaps you had some sort of legal issue, like you were convicted for drunk driving. That certainly needs to go into the second paragraph and be clearly explained as soon as possible. So you definitely want to take care of that in that second paragraph. For those of you that don't have any significant red flags, the second and third paragraph should be used to expand upon your application. What do I mean by that? Well, there are lots of items in the application that you're going to go over in the general ERAS application that are interesting, but there's not really enough room to explain them. And you maybe have worked on these experiences where you've done research in these areas for many years, and it's something that you want to relay to the reader. The second and third paragraphs are the places to do so. Also, importantly, when you're writing those second and third paragraphs, make sure to show and not tell the reader about what you've done. What do I mean by that? Let me give you an example. Say you've been working at NASA on the Webb Space Telescope. You don't want to say, I was a hard worker and was well liked by everybody. Rather, you want to say, I spent 1,000 hours building the mirror for the telescope, constantly correcting for mistakes to such a fine degree that the engineering societies considered it to be almost perfect. And maybe to show you were well liked by everybody, you can say, when you were done completing the telescope, NASA held a ticker tape parade for me. Well, that's probably not the case, but hopefully you get the idea. And that brings us to the final paragraph. This is the time to sum up. I find this to be a very difficult part of writing a blog or personal statement. How do you tie together everything into a tight knot so that everything comes together and makes sense? Well, one of the things that I like to do is to make sure to write about what you'll bring to the table if your residency program or job selects you based upon what you've stated in your personal statement. Let's go back to that Webb telescope example. You can say something like, given my experience with my successful quest for perfection by creating an almost perfect telescope mirror, similarly, I plan to hone my skills to become an incredible radiology by always learning from others and my fellow clinicians to get close to perfection. Bottom line, you want to make sure to apply your experiences to the job that you want to get. There are other general issues as well that you need to think about, especially with editing your personal statement. I recommend that all of you look at your statement many, many times. It could be 100 times. There are always things that can be improved, mistakes that are made. It's very, very easy to let one of those mistakes slip through the cracks. Have a friend or relative read your personal statement. A lot of times you can't catch errors because you have written the personal statement and you know what you want to say, but other people don't realize necessarily what you want to say. Also, make sure to read the personal statement out loud. Sometimes you can only detect errors by listening to what you've actually written. And finally, I recommend to use a grammar correcting program. One of the ones I'm an affiliate of is Grammarly, and it's actually great. I use it constantly for my blogs. It's gotten me out of some sticky situations. Also, you can use Microsoft Word. That also has some grammar correcting features as well. So those are a couple of ways that you can go about making that personal statement successful. And lastly, there's some other useful tidbits. Avoid using the term I all the time. It sounds very redundant, you appear selfish, and you create the impression that you're not necessarily going to be a team player. Try to use the active and not the passive tense. When using the passive tense, the reader has to do more work to figure out what's going on. You appear less in control of what's in your resume. And finally, the sentences tend to be more verbose/wordy. Think about the following phrase. The job of creating a computer algorithm was completed over the course of 10 years. You don't know who the subject is. It's very wordy. Instead, think about this sentence in the active tense. My colleagues and I created a computer algorithm over the course of 10 years. Much less wordy, easier to understand. It just is a much better feel. Also, use sentence transitions. Words like also, in other case, these things help to make an idea or sentence flow and sound more smooth. And it also creates more interest rather than stating the same subject at the beginning of a sentence. And in that same vein, also, don't use the same word at the beginning of each sentence. That also gets kind of boring over time and is a surefire way to make the reading experience less enjoyable. So those are some general rules that I recommend you use to create that killer personal statement. These are rules I apply to my blog on a weekly basis, and these are the same rules I see in those best personal statements that I have read. So I know they work well. So go forth and write that personal statement. Now you have all the tools that you need. Good luck.